Hurt. Hurt usually comes in the form of unmet needs, whether those unmet needs are real or we perceive them as real. The children and I have been through several things. They'll come up, not so much anymore. I think they've learned this, but I remember Ruth and Vernon particularly coming up and saying, "Papa, I need," and they'll point to something. I say, "Wait a minute, we need to talk about what a need is. A need is something that your life is going to end if you don't have. Obviously, the bubble gum in the candy store is not a need. Your life is not going to end if you don't have it." So sometimes we perceive something as a need, and when we don't have that need met or perceived need met, we become angry. Oh yes, it happens. I'm the parent of 9 children. I can tell you that happens. In Proverbs chapter 19 and in verse 3, Solomon says, "When a man's folly brings his way to ruin, his heart rages against the Lord." How many times do we have an unmet need or a unmet perceived need in life and we blame God for it? The loss of a loved one. How easy it is, speaking from experience, how easy it would have been when my brother died in a tractor accident 3 years ago to blame God for my little brother's death. After all, God's in control, right? Really, wasn't it a decision of my brother's to brush hog a field where he knew there was problems, where danger existed? A decision he made. Proverbs chapter 27 in verse 4 says, "Wrath is cruel, anger is overwhelming, but who can stand before jealousy?" See, jealousy is rooted in hurt, and anger is often the result of hurt or jealousy. I'm not going to go back to Genesis chapter 37 for time's sake, but we can notice Psalm chapter 10. I do want to go to Psalm chapter 10 because a lot of the Psalms, you will see David expresses anger because he's been hurt. Psalm chapter 10 is a prime example of this. And I wished I could have gone through all of these, but time would not permit it. But Psalm chapter 10 goes like this. In the first part of the Psalm, we see the hurt in verses 1 through 12. "Why, O Lord, do you stand far away?" Feel the hurt? See, David's hurting. "Why do you hide yourself in time of trouble? In arrogance, the wicked hotly pursue the poor." The injustice that he's feeling here. "Let them be caught in the schemes that they have devised. For the wicked boast of the desires of his soul, and the greedy for gain curses and renounces the Lord. In the pride of his face, the wicked does not seek him. All his thoughts are, there goes God. There is no God. His ways prosper at all times. Your judgments are on high, out of his sight. For all his foes, he puffs at them. He says in his heart, I shall not be moved. Throughout all generations, I shall not meet adversity. His mouth is filled with cursing, and deceit and oppression. Under his tongue are mischief and iniquity. He sits in ambush in the village. In hiding places, he murders the innocent. His eyes stealthily watch for the helpless. He lurks in ambush like a lion in his thicket. He lurks that he may seize the poor. He seizes the poor when he draws him into his net. The helpless are crushed sink down and fall by his might. See the psalmist here. And in verse 11 he says in his heart, God has forgotten. He has hidden his face. He will never see it. See, the psalmist is feeling all of this hurt and injustice. And you can almost feel the emotion of anger playing through this psalm. But then there's the second part. And I think this is where we have to rely on God. You see, the psalmist doesn't end with verse 11. The psalmist said, God is the fix. God is the solution. And he calls on God to fix the problem. He says, arise, O God, lift up your hand. Forget not the afflicted. Why does the wicked renounce God and say in his heart, you will not call to account? But you do see, for you note mischief and vexation, that you may take into your hand to the people, or into the hands to you, the helpless, commit himself. You have been the helper of the fatherless. Break the arm of the wicked and evildoer. Call his wickedness to account till you find none. See, the psalmist is saying God is the answer. I'm turning to God. Whatever our emotion, the answer is God. And calling God into help with whatever situation we're dealing with. There's a song we sing, take it to the Lord in prayer. That's what the psalmist is doing here. And in the bottom part of this, the psalmist is then transferring his emotion of anger at the injustice, at the hurt. He is then mentally transferring his emotion to God's shoulders. After calling on God, he transfers the emotion to God, that God can bear it. And he says this, the Lord is king forever. The nations perish from his land. The Lord, O Lord, you hear the desire of the afflicted. You will strengthen their heart. You will incline your ear to justice, to the fatherless, the oppressed, so that man who is of the earth may strike terror no more. The psalmist has taken his anger. He's gone to God. He's asked for justice, and then he transfers. It's a mental process that the psalmist has gone through. And Psalms throughout the book of Psalms have this pattern to them. Hurt unresolved over time builds thin layers of resentment. If we're hurt and we don't transfer that hurt to God, over time it builds resentment, bitterness, and that surrounds and poisons our heart. Frustration. Frustration is oftentimes manifested in unmet expectations. I want to turn back to 2 Kings. I want you to see a wife whom David loved, who was precious to him, who had certain expectations of what her husband would be like as king. And when David fails to meet these expectations, anger is the result. 2 Kings chapter 5, and in verse, I think I've got the right passage, verse 11, let me make sure. No, I don't. I apologize. I believe it must be 1 Kings chapter 5. Let me try that. Anyway, I can tell you what's going on, what I want to go with. And this is not right either. Anyway, I'll find the right passage. Never mind. 1 Chronicles. Before we go there, let's go to 2 Kings chapter 5, though.